If your plan is for 1 year, plant rice. If your plan is for 10 years, plant trees. If your plan is for 100 years, educate the children. Confucius. And this, folks, is all minus one. Hey, as always, I ask, please go like, share, subscribe. Sharing's really big, guys. It helps my channel grow. It puts me in a position where essentially I'm spreading the word, right? I'm helping to build these communities. It also enables me some financial opportunity, which I don't really have a lot of right now. So do that if you think that you know like-minded folks who are receptive to opinions they may not be hearing within the mainstream media, because this channel is alternative media. Now, am I covering news all the time? No. I take things from a Christian, historical, philosophical perspective. Does that mean that I cover no news? Absolutely not. I cover a lot of news. I'm looking at global powers and the changing of tides of things and who's actually in control of the world. And I talk about conspiracy and all this other fun stuff. And I make predictions. So far, my predictions have been correct. Because it's not that hard to predict things when you have your eyes on the ball, when you have your ear to the ground, and you're paying attention to the proper things, and you understand how the system works. And I'm going to show you here in a bit on this topic today how people are making wrong predictions who are in the mainstream media. Maybe not the mainstream, but in large publications who don't know what they're talking about, yet they seem to be the experts, if you would. Anyways, with all that, I do have a locals. You can go over there and sub if you want. I upload there directly my shorter segments. Cannot do that with the longer segments, but I will use my alt tech to put a link in there to some of the things. So my stuff is there. You can find everything on one spot. There is no paywall. You can just go there. I have a Rumble. Please go to subscribe to that, because eventually I will disappear. I don't have it up here on screen, but I have started re-uploading to BitChute. That has been a thing here recently. So, in any case, I'm also on PeerTube, and I have a live show every Wednesday at 7 p.m. We do a live show. I have a producer, co-host, Tank, who helps me do a live show that is about 2 hours, sometimes longer. We've been trying to have a lot of guests on lately, and it is our just general musings. It's called The Ends Justify the Memes. You can find us on DLive and YouTube, and it's just us having a good old time talking about serious topics. So with all that, folks, hey, this is the topic of the day, the Chinese century. Now, many of you may know that there is a 100-year Chinese plan that started back with the CCP back in the day, and that has pretty much come to fruition. I will be covering that soon here in the future. That probably Tuesday coming up. Today is Friday. So in any case, what I want to talk to you about more importantly is what is going on globally with the Chinese takeover of the world economy. They are about to be the largest world economy, and at the same time, the Federal Reserve Bank is purposefully inflating our currency. They are giving corporations bailouts and, of course, the people some stimulus, not really much of anything. But regardless, this has a price. They're also talking about raising minimum wage, which hasn't quite happened yet, but I believe eventually will. And it will happen. And with the lockdowns and everything else, stuff that China isn't doing, look, America's just not going to be a power very, very soon. We're also destroying our military, which I will get into that a little bit here today. But let's just read this little wiki article real quick. So it says the Chinese century is a neologism suggests that the 21st century will be geoeconomically and geopolitically dominated by the People's Republic of China, similar to the American century refers to the 20th century, and the Pax Britannica, the British peace, refers to the 19th century. The phrase is used particularly in the assertion that the economy of China will overtake the economy of the United States to be the largest in the world. They're already there, guys. I don't know about GDP wise, but as far as banking, as far as manufacturing, as far as land ownership across the world, infrastructure that they are building within themselves and in other nations, China is already there. And this is all a thing that started back with Nixon going over and basically opening up China to capitalism. And I'm more than certain, because we just got rid of Bretton Woods, that this was a globalist plan. It is what makes the most sense in the grander scheme of things. So, and perhaps we are doing this as America to somehow bring in some sort of alliance. Now, again, this is speculation on my part, but to make us have some sort of alliance, some sort of union. Back in the day, we talked about having an North American union with Canada and Mexico and Central America, and turning our currency into the Amero. That was part of the NAFTA superhighway that never came to fruition. This was covered on Lou Dobbs, folks, on CNN. This is not conspiracy. I know CNN does a lot of conspiracy theory today that's called real news, even though it's fake. This was sort of the plan. They couldn't do it because Americans were still patriotic enough. But slowly over time, our sensibilities get eroded and we lean further and further towards leftist authoritarianism. And so what we're going to see, like I said, potentially, is that in order to bolster ourselves up. Again, I don't know if that will be true, but ideally what will happen is that the world will break into sectors of these larger global economies. So like the UN is a section, the North American Union, there'll be a South American Union, and so forth. And actually, this is how the IMF and Club of Rome already break up us as far as regions of the world and how they look at it. So, here from the New York Times, this is an old article from July 4th, 2024. I had just recently archived this to get past the paywall, so you can look this up on archive.today if you would like. It says the Chinese century. China used to be far away, the country at the bottom of the world. Certainly, that must be how it seemed just 20 years ago in a place like Peking, a city of 34,000 residents on the Illinois River that took its name from the Chinese capital in 1820s. According to local legend, I said Peking, didn't I? I said Peking is directly opposite Beijing on the globe. The high school teams there were still called the, I'm not going to say that, in 1981 when they were renamed to the Dragons, a smart and forward-looking decision. It turns out, as I can't believe the New York Times printed that, actually. That is cancel culture, folks. Cancel the New York Times. Anyways, as is happening throughout the United States, the Pekingese have their own local ways of grown extricability linked to the Chinese of today. They are now connected not by an imaginary hole through the earth, but by the world's shipping lanes, financial markets, telecommunications networks, and above all, the globalization of appetites. Follow the corn, for example. Trade deals struck between the U.S. and China in April. Will farmers around Peking hope lead China to lower its import barriers and buy 500,000 metric tons of American corn this year? Well, we kind of know how this worked out until Donald Trump came along, don't we? This was during the GW years. It says Illinois' corn farming getting higher than usual prices for their exports because they have ready access to river transportation and turn to big ports. Pekin is Pekin or Pekin, however you pronounce it, whatever, is also home to the plant of Aventine Renewable Energy, the nation's second largest producer of ethanol, a fuel derived from corn, a fuel that went nowhere. And Brazil tried to switch over to ethanol, folks. Did not go well. 10% of the American corn crop is converted to fuel. China recently passed Japan as the world's second largest consumer of petroleum. And growing Chinese demand has lately been pushing up oil prices worldwide. Well, that and the newly minted Iraq war at the time and the burning of oil fields. In fact, I witnessed this firsthand. I flew over in helos and watched the oil fields burning, folks. That kind of changed some things. Oil prices went up for a long time. It wasn't China. It was inflation. It was the war. It was our meddling in the Middle East. It's never one factor. It's a multifaceted issue every single time when we're talking about geopolitical issues and markets and all that kind of stuff. So anyways, let's continue. That makes ethanol an increasingly attractive alternative. And indeed, ethanol prices climbed 40% a gallon this spring, dragging up U.S. corn prices as a result. A boon to Pekin's farmers and industry. Then there's Exile Foundry and Machine, a local factory that makes parts for machinery used in heavy construction and mining operations. Doug Parsons, the current head of the family-owned business, has already relocated 12% of the company's production to China in order to hold onto business that would otherwise be lost to China's huge, cheap foundries during the next decade. He may well have to move much more of his production offshores. Parsons has China on his mind for other reasons too. Over the past few months, the prices of copper and iron, like those of oil, have skyrocketed in response to Chinese demand, driving up Excel's cost as a result. At the same time, however, this international mining customers have been buying more Excel products in order to feed that same Chinese appetite for commodities. Parsons himself recently started a new company that he says will build and service advanced rock crushing machines, in part to take advantage of the frenzied construction boom underway in China. This was 20 years ago, folks. Recall that. 20 years ago, nearly. One measure of just how this big boom is, China currently has more than 15,000 highway projects in the works, which will add 162,000 kilometers of road on the country, enough to circle the planet at the equator 4 times. And they're doing more of this. I would suggest you go over and look at Academic Agent's video on the Chinese infrastructure. He did one, I think, back in the summer or spring. Might have been earlier than that, but he did a really good video, quite concise, about their infrastructure building. And man, they're building up a lot. They have a lot of countryside, and they are building up a lot of roads, much like we did during the Cold War. Recall also that our roads are largely neglected today. Our infrastructure is largely neglected. America is not in a good spot, folks. We are strategically not in a good spot. The only thing that gives us real power is our military might, and we are destroying that purposefully. I'm telling you right now, that is being gotten rid of. The standards are changing. The discipline is changing. The ability to get people in. Obviously, they're talking about political tests now. There's just a ton of stuff there. Even something as all-American as Pekin's new Walmart supercenter spreads Chinese influence around town because 12% of China's exports to the U.S. end up in Walmart's shelves. And because Walmart's trade with China accounts for a 1% of that country's gross domestic product, the company exerts tremendous downward pressure on prices. Its buying power enables it to dictate, in effect, what a Chinese manufacturer will get for producing goods that American consumers want. By selling Chinese-made portable DVD players with 7-inch LCD screens for less than $200, for instance, Walmart helped to cut the price of these trendy devices in half over the last year. Competitors have to match the chain's price or go under. This is before the advent of smartphones, folks. This is an interesting time. I remember back in 2000, I like in my barracks, I wasn't a small unit. We're talking about like 70, 80 folk at most. I think 75 maybe. That's like 10 or 15 people in headquarters. And then two platoons. Um, the the barracks had nobody in it except for me that had a DVD player at the time. Seems odd, but my dad's like kind of a tech guy, and he was all up on that. I might have been one of the few people I knew in high school that had a DVD player, other than some really rich kids, and we did not grow up rich. So yeah, big deal then, big deal then. But let's go down here, and this is a very long article, so I won't be reading the whole thing, but you can go find it. I'll show you the title of it once again. In short, Pekin, Illinois, is not so different from lots of American places. China is everywhere these days, influencing our lives as consumers, providers, citizens. It has by far the world's most rapidly changing large economy, and our reactions to it shift just as quickly. China is at one moment our greatest threat, and at the next, our friend. It siphons off American jobs. It is essential to our competitive edge. China is the world's factory floor, and it is the world's greatest market opportunity. China's industrial might steals opportunities from the developing world, even as its booming economy pulls poorer countries up. Lately, it has been getting credit for helping Japan out of its slump, too. And I wanted to address Japan. I'll finish this paragraph. China exports deflation. It stokes soaring prices. Not sure what they mean by that. China will boom, it will bust, or perhaps the country's economy is feeling its way right now to the soft landing that will prevent another Asian economic crash. And all the recent records numbers on trade, industrial output, consumer spending, and debt are simply now in scale with China's size. The truth about China is that, like all big tech countries, it is full of real contradictions. So, Japan. Japan was one of the leading manufacturers. If you were a child of the 70s or 80s, you would recall that all the best stuff was made in Japan. Japan hyperinflated. Their economy crashed. They had to have a reset, and China took over. That's essentially what happened, in short. Now China is getting some competition with India, but India is frankly a mess, folks. It came out of their Chinese, Russian, communistic indoctrination, and they still are very much a third world nation. They have a lot of issues because of their religious fervor and their class system, or caste system, I mean. Although many people in India are not abiding by that so much these days, it's still very prevalent. There isn't a lot of infrastructure in India. It's a huge nation with 1 billion people as well. And rest assured that if China can, it will influence and take over that as much as possible. It is competition, of course. And I just don't see India as being that big of a deal per se, given that the Chinese have been very meticulous in assuring their global dominance. So again, you can find this at archive.today. This is the New York Times, The Chinese Century by Ted C. Fishman, July 4th, 2004. I'm sure if you Google search it, you will be able to find it. So here's another little interesting thing. This is just Amazon, right? The Chinese Century, the rising economy and its impact on the global economy, the balance of power and your job. This is a first edition. Not very expensive. Let's see. Let me take this off. Let's see what the other prices are. Hardcover is $45. So that's kind of expensive, but I wanted to read this. By 2015, China may well have the world's largest economy. The Chinese Century audit Sinkar shows how China is restoring its imperial glory by infusing modern technology and market economics into a non-democratic system controlled by the Communist Party and bureaucracy. He shows why China's quest for global success differs radically from the predecessors such as Japan, India, and Mexico. And that's another thing. Mexico went through a period of hyperinflation. We actually helped cause that, but Mexico has a lot of industry there. Of course, they have their drug cartel issue as well. So their stuff. Why it represents a fundamental restructuring of global business systems and why it will transform the roles of participation in global economy. He previews tomorrow's new competitive ground rules, terms of employment, and consumption patterns, and shows how Chinese audacity is redrawing political, economic, and social battle lines. Learn why the U.S. is most vulnerable to China's assets, how China's disregard for intellectual property creates sustainable competitive advantage. Yeah. How China's growth impacts global business, yada, yada, yada. The thing is because of the drive for corporatism, for protectionism, and under the guise of capitalism, under the guise of free markets, the businesses like it. They like it. They don't care. They only care about who protects them. This is why Google and Facebook and other nations will do special software for China and spying. It's why they have their little their little social media credit score thing, right? So this is from United States Study Center, sorry. That's why I turned it off dark mode, folks. From the United States Study Center, and this is www.ussc.edu.au. So I'm assuming that is an Australian org. 2nd of May, 2010, the Chinese century. So this is Dean and Professor in the practice of public policy, Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, National University of Singapore. You should understand this because Singapore is highly free market. And of course, China is very nearby and a threat to them. We are entering a new era of world history marked by two distinct features. First, after 200 years, we will see the end of Western domination of world history, but not, of course, the end of the West. Let me remind you what this wiki article said here about the American century and the Pax Britannica. Second, we will see the return of Asia. From the year Yuan to 1820, China and India were constantly the two largest economies. No, consistently. I was right the first time. Man, us dyslexics, I swear. The two largest economies of the world, hence by 2050 or earlier, when they once again became the two largest economies of the world, we will return to a historic norm of the past 2,000 years. And in history, it is easier to return to historic norms than deviate from them. Well, we're talking about 2,000 years ago, man, so I get what you're saying. But you have to understand that there is a 100-year history before of China that they felt very ashamed being under Western and Japanese occupation. And I will talk about that probably next Tuesday and their 100-year plans. There is a lot of vitriol in the Chinese people, or at least the people running their government. The end of Western domination of world history means that we have to drop our Western cultural lenses to understand the new era. However, this would require retooling the most influential Western minds in the world in governments, think tanks, media, and academia. These thousands of Western pundits have a disproportionate influence in the global discourse on the state of the world. And because their minds are filled with distorted perspectives, they generate false understandings. Since this is a very strong claim to make, I will support it by providing 3 examples of distorted Western perspectives on China. First, fundamental flaw in Western assumptions about China is that eventually, like all other successful developed economies, China too will join the great Western project and become just like us. No. This is the outer. This is the esoteric. That is the outer view. The inner view, the esoteric, the secret hidden view, the occult view. is no, they'll just be the world power and they'll do the things that they want to do. And what the globalists have done is they've watched China build themselves up, and they go, well, we don't quite like communism, but we do like what the CCP's doing with building things up and providing stuff for their people, and the control they have over dissenters. So like the great cultural leap, the great cultural revolution in China, that that's a problem, right? That's a lot of mass murder and stuff, imprisonment. That's like Soviet style bad stuff. That's like Cambodia style Khmer Rouge stuff, right? We don't like that. Can't do that openly. But we can seclude Uyghurs, and we can take their organs, and we can sterilize them, and we can re-educate them. That's okay. That's okay. As Joe Biden just recently said, it's just a cultural difference. Therefore, I'm not going to speak on it. All right, Joe. The Nazis, they what they did was just a cultural difference, was it not? You see how the left plays their games? I mean, they call the Nazis right wing, which is absurd. Absolutely absurd. Yeah, whatever. Right wing how? In their progressive motives and their global domination? Yeah. No. Anyways, moving on. And this assumption became fully exposed. Let's see. Hold on. The first fundamental is that China too will join the great yes. The assumption that there was only one destination in world history is deeply rooted in Western minds. And the assumption became fully exposed in all corners of the West, from North America to Europe, Australia to Canada, with the publication of Francis Fukuyama's famous essay, The End of History. The celebration of this essay showed that Western minds believed that there was only one peak of human civilization, Western civilization. The West has climbed to the peak. Now, all it had to do was to wait for the rest of humanity to join it. The West did not have to struggle anymore, but the rest of humanity still had to struggle to reach the peak of civilization. Not really. This is kind of a revisionist history, because ancient societies were very strong. The West actually had a decline and rose back up. It was more stable in the East. But look, guys, the societies, cultures came out of the Middle East, migrated to the East and West, essentially north, and they went southward. And the main places where essentially large imperialistic powers grew were in Asia and in European nations. And that largely has to do with geography and not much else. Geography is a very important thing for the species and where we live, right? That's why I say go live in the mountains. Because living off in a field somewhere in the middle of nowhere, it's going to be easy to get to you. Living in the mountains, not so much. It's the Iranian problem, why we won't go into Iran. It's the Afghan problem, why Afghanistan will never really be truly taken, just sort of occupied. It says 20 years later, we know that Fukuyama's belief was a delusion. Yet, it is vital to emphasize that his assumption has not been scrubbed out of Western minds. The leading Western minds cannot conceive of the possibility that there may be just one road in history. Hence, even though a few explore the possibility, they still believe that China's present Communistic Party-run government cannot survive. It will only be a matter of time before a rose or orange revolution surfaces in China. The Tiananmen Square protests of 1989 are interpreted as an early tremor and foretaste of what would eventually happen in China and overthrow the Communist Party state and the arrival of Western-style liberal democracy. No, because unlike in Russia, the Chinese don't allow disinformation. One of the reasons why Russia fell rather peacefully, the Soviet Union, is because they started allowing information in. Why do you think North Korea is so closed off? It's so they can maintain their control. China has bigger plans, though, and the NGOs, the globalist NGOs, they like China, as I just said. The combined population of the West is about 860 million. The population of China is about 1.3 billion. It takes historical arrogance to assume that Western civilization is large enough to absorb Chinese civilization. Simple truth is that China has such a strong and distinctive culture of its own that it will not be absorbed by the West, nor will it join the Western project. I disagree with this guy. It has taken, it's taken what they find good in the West and mixed it with their own culture. I mean, South America has done this. South America has a large indigenous population that has integrated with the Spanish and Portuguese population that has moved there, and later on the Japanese, and also the African slave population of the time. And they've all kind of intermingled that. Right? Like, that's kind of how it's worked. This is the way civilizations come about. It's how Western civilization came about largely. With our lineage from the Greeks. And as Alexander the Great went east, of course, before that, we had Easterners coming into the West, and that happened over and over again. But as he went east, we picked up some things. We came back. He died. His four generals split up the empire, and eventually Rome took over. That's how these things work, guys. It's how it works. Anyone who's educated would know this. In any case, this is another quite long article. Let me get to the second part here. Second fundamental flaw in Western assumption is about China and the belief that if China does not become a Western-style liberal democracy, it will collapse and break down, as it has in the past. The collapse of the Soviet Union and all other communist regimes in Eastern Europe, therefore, provide an early indicator of the fate that presumably awaits the Communist Party in China. This deep Western desire to believe that the Chinese regime is about to collapse was revealed most clearly at the height of the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009. And we'll talk about that, because here is an article from the Federalist where they basically say, oh, the Chinese century won't be a thing. Well, what are we watching, folks? Anyways, virtually no Western analysis pointed out that the obvious flaw in the belief that the Chinese regime would collapse, it was based on the assumption that the Chinese people would be stupid enough to overthrow a regime that had given them 30 years of some of the world's fastest growth because of 1 year of bad economic performance. Even more strikingly illustrating the West's self-absorption, the consensus among most Western economists was that China's economy could only collapse if the Western economies collapse. This is just silliness. The same economists said that the financial bubble was not a thing, that the housing markets would be fine. So again, who are we talking about here? The Chinese system does not work, but it will work as long as they are a global power, much like our system doesn't work, but it works because we have the threat of guns. Everyone needs to use the dollar. Well, as part of our debt is China's and a lot of other nations. It's a small fraction, guys. Most of our debt's to our actual banking system, the Federal Reserve. But pretty absurd. But yeah, we owe money to the people that print our money out of nowhere, that inflate our money. It's insanity. But this fiat system that we're on will continue as long as people just go along with it, and other nations are like, oh, okay, your money's worth something, as long as there are guns to back it up. The guns to back it up are going to be on China's side very soon. A little bit further down here, it says, it is amazing that there has been little reflection on the West's colossal failure in judgment. For example, in 2009, when so many Western analysts expected the Chinese regime to either be shaken by large public demonstrations or to collapse, Edward Chancellor, a financial journalist and author, said the Chinese economy is dangerously unbalanced and very likely to come unhinged in the next few quarters. And again, no, they have too many investments and too much resource investment, too much land, too many banks all around the globe, man. They got their fingers in a lot. Xi Jinping was invited to Davos to talk about the COOF. This is the World Economic Forum. Took no responsibility for it, completely ignored it. Remember what they did with the whole thing. Of course, no, that's just the Western world trying to destroy China. China's great. As they eat gutter oil and whatever else, man. What the way the wet markets work. my co-host over on the Ends Justify the Memes, I mean, he speaks Chinese. He studied Chinese history as part of his degree. He's been to China numerous times. He can tell you all about it. It's no utopia, folks. But the cities are doing well. And that's always what's important. The countryside, nobody cares about. The third fundamental flaw in the Western assumption about China is the belief that China cannot rise peacefully. One of the most common refrains I have heard in many Western fora is this: Europe's past is Asia's future. Okay, well, China was an imperial power within itself. The Mongolians came in and took it over, of course. The Japanese came in and took China over, 2 centuries ago. It's passed back and forth. Look, guys, whether they are militarily aggressive or not, it depends. But if they're economically intelligent, they won't be. But they will do whatever they wish to do and take over whatever they want to take over, as long as no one is holding them back. So if they get the go-ahead from the influencers and the NGOs, and the U.S. is like, we're not going to stop you, they'll do what they want. Look at what's going on in Hong Kong, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see. Just as the rise of the new powers in Europe in the 19th century led to war and conflict, the same would happen as new powers rose in Asia in the 21st century. Few Western analysts will admit that their analysis is conditioned by Western interest. There is no doubt that the Western interest would be better served by rivalries between, say, China and Japan, or, say, China and India. A peaceful rising Asia will mean diminishing Western influence. Conflicts and rivalries between Asian powers would give useful geopolitical opportunities for Western mischief. As Henry Kissinger once famously remarked about the Iran-Iraq war, it's a pity they both can't lose. Yeah, because Kissinger would just want to come in and take over. So anyways, this is a very long article. Again, cannot get through the whole thing. Nor do I really want to, because you need to go read for yourself. That's United States Studies Center. That is the Chinese Century, and of course the Professor Kishore Mahabani, I guess, whatever. This is from Harvard. Harvard University Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. Will the 21st century be the Chinese century? 2 of Harvard's most astute China observers assess the prospect and limitations of rapidly growing superpower. This is June 13th, 2013. 2 of Harvard's most, I just read that basically. A wife is jailed for poisoning a business acquaintance, a man with whom her family was enmeshed in shadowy, lucrative financial schemes. Her charismatic husband, once ruthless in his privilege, is humbled, disgraced, and about to face his own prosecutors. Their seat of power evaporates as allies and enemies battle over the remains. And a young heir, a rumored jet-setter, sees his fortune plummet. The scandal reaches all the way to the top. It's a plot line that might have been ripped from a script in a vintage American soap opera, but its lurid tale is real, as are the insights it offers to explosive growth. Amazing resources and crippling limitations of its particular setting. China, that is ancient and all new, revolutionary, and consistent, too big to fail, where some gestures and good lunch still make things run. This is China's new movement of transition. The Communist Party has moved a new slate of leadership onto the Politburo's elite standing committee, and party chief Xi Jinping became president in March, president for life, by the way, folks, vowing to tackle corporations, wasteful spending, and wide disparities in wealth and living standards, all the while continuing an extraordinary infrastructure boom and bolstering the military. So, real quick on that first note there of the wealthy Chinese gentleman. Recently, there was a multi-millionaire, maybe billionaire Chinese dude that disappeared I can't recall his name off the top of my head because it's been a few weeks since I've seen that, but he just absolutely just disappeared. Made a few criticisms of the CCP and no longer in existence. Maybe he's reappeared. Maybe I'm a little bit late to the news on this. I've been focused elsewhere, but guys, it happens all the time. They just disappear you. Remember when the guy who blew the whistle on the coup disappeared? And then he reappeared with the coup and died of it? See, the reason why China won't fail, per se, is because they don't allow the literature in, right? Think of, I always like to bring up Yamin Park, because her journey from North Korea into South Korea, she didn't know that there were choices. She didn't know that there was a different perspective. She didn't even know that life could be the way that it was. She had no clue because she was so isolated. When you are in complete ignorance, you don't know the possibility, the bounty that is before you. This is, again, how, in part, you become enslaved, is through ignorance. This is why it's so important to control the internet, as China does. If you control the information, right, you can control the people, largely. This is why people disappear when they start to talk about Tiananmen Square. This is why most people who are 30 or younger in China don't even know what Tiananmen Square was. They don't know that people were gunned down and mowed down in the streets in their own nation. They don't know that a young man stood in front of a tank and was run over. They don't know. They have no clue. And this is why fighting big tech is so important, because the government supposedly can't censor us, though they do all the time. But my private company supposedly can. Now, to me, they're telecommunication firms, just like the phone company. You can't just click off the phone company and say, well, we don't like your speech, here at AT&T, therefore you can't use our service anymore. Same with banking. But we have no protections for banking in the United States. We have no right to banking. Although I would say that is a freedom of association issue. But, yeah, there's a lot there. A lot. As a nation of 1.3 billion people rockets through the start of a new century, economists and policymakers are wondering whether China, now the world's second largest economy, again, 2013, is poised to become the world's sole superpower. Well, guess what? As the coup came out, they kept rolling, and we're inflating our money, and they're not so much. Not so much. So, that is the question that animates the forthcoming book. Business experts study. During the conversation at HBS, Kirby and McFarlane, two of the most engaged and nuanced Chinese watchers at Harvard, say that the case of Bo Xi Li, I guess that's how you say it, that disgraced former politician with the murderous wife, captures enduring patterns in Chinese history when revealing systematic weaknesses and microcosm. No, that actually just seems like anything out of, European history too. Game of Thrones, just human nature. Anyways, guys, I am getting long. This is 40 some odd minutes right now. So go look this article up if you wish. Go read more, educate yourself. This is from Harvard. Will the 21st century be the Chinese century? What I want to get to is the naysayers. And again, this is from the Federalist. When was this written? 2015, March 2015. Why? The 21st century will not be the Chinese century. 6 years ago, this gentleman predicted this almost to the day, and he is wrong. The popular narrative couldn't be clearer. America, once the world lone superpower, is now being supplanted by China, while America is bogged down in gridlock partisanship and short-termness democracy. China's benevolent one-party rulers set long-term goals and make decisive decisions that foster breakneck economic growth. This is nonsense. We're not in real gridlock. We're in a uniparty. And so the issues we discuss here in the United States are false issues to keep you basically not on the trail. Because the trail is this. We're a bunch of globalists. We are the military hand of the global government. We have been since the Second World War, evidenced by our first act initiated by the Yuan, that is going into Korea, and using war powers without congressional authorization. One of the many reasons why Ike Eisenhower was voted into office, by the way. One of our few independent non-puppet presidents. And in any case, guys, we have a uniparty, and it's more about, well, how can we bolster up the corporation? How can we do this and that? How can we enrich ourselves? Well, we know that we're trying to bring about this global one world order that's actually real. I mean, it's real now, but I mean that we can actually, sanction states with actual authority, or go in and say, no, we can make you do it. 20 years ago, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the term Washington Consensus was coined to signify the success of the classically liberal American form of governance: limited representative government, free markets, and free people. That died in the 1930s, though. Some thought no economy could fully develop and thrive without adopting the principles embodied in the Washington Consensus. I don't know where that term came from. That's a bunch of gaslighting folks. But since then, in light of the rapid Chinese gross domestic product growing, and Beijing's consensus has emerged to oppose the Washington Consensus, the Beijing Consensus posits that allowing some economic freedom, albeit with guidance from a strong central government, is the ideal way to foster economic development. Well, wait a minute. That's what we've been doing since the 1930s. We've just been a little bit less, a little bit more, a little bit less, a little bit more. In fact, generally, we've been 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We have a very centralized, controlled, planned economy. And every time Dems get into office, we have an even more so one. And look, Trump repealing some regulations, that was probably one of the biggest steps that has ever been taken historically to repeal regulations. I know OGW did a little bit, but not really. He was a globalist, right? And I think Reagan did a good bit himself, but Reagan made a lot of concessions to the machine. So anyways, I mean, not that Trump didn't. He certainly did. Presidents are only so powerful, folks. They're not your Lord and Savior. In the past decade, emerging economies such as Brazil and Russia have decided against emulating America and instead have sought to model China. Interesting, right? Even some among American elites have labeled measured praise toward Chinese version of state capitalism. Yeah, and the World Economic Forum and the UN and everybody else. It's what's coming, folks. But the Beijing Consensus is about to fall flat. China's one-party centralized control has led to massive asset price bubble and slow-motion crisis that will bring economic stagnation. Full economic development is not possible outside the Washington Consensus. I disagree, buddy. You're talking, this is 2015. This is the end of the Obama era. This is absolute absurdity to even make this prediction. This is somebody that believes that the system we're in is actually a free market system, which means just about anything and everything he has to say can be disregarded. Now, there might be some truths in here, but again, you cannot have a proper strategy unless you know where you're at on the battlefield. You have to count the cost, as Christ once said. Count the cost. That no man, no leader, no general would take his men to war without first having known what his troops are capable of and the number that he's going to face, right? This guy doesn't understand what the United States is capable of and what we've been doing, in my opinion. And he's writing for the Federalists, so I get that. He's a classically liberal, conservative-minded individual, libertarian probably. For years, China has practiced mercantilism. So has the United States. Amazing. The subsidization of export-driven growth by artificially devaluing Chinese currency, the yuan. I could literally say, for years, America has practiced mercantilism. The subsidization of export-driven growth by artificially devaluating the American currency, the dollar. Reads the same, means the same thing. When a country exports more than it imports, the value of its currency naturally rises as people demand more of the exporting country's currency to purchase the exported goods. Not so in China. Wonder why? Well, hopefully he'll explain. We don't have to worry about this so much. We have a lot of protectionism for certain goods, but we don't have to worry about this so much because we have the petrodollar. China knows what it's doing, though. To favor exporters as a with vast political ties, who employs countless millions and thus reduce social unrest, China has kept the yuan pegged to the dollar by expanding the monetary base, which keeps the yuan's value from rising. Oh, that's why. It's tied to the dollar. Guess what your new world currency is going to be, folks? According to the American Enterprise Institute's Derek Scissors, China's 2M, a measure of monetary supply, reached 20 trillion at the end of 2014, a staggering 70% larger than the U.S., where monetary policy has hardly been tight. You guys should, like, your spidey senses should be going off here big time, right? The government calls the expansion of the monetary base has led to cheap money and loose lending standards, which has sparked demand for riskier investments. The demand for risky investments has inflated a bubble. But bubbles can be deflated. You can preempt and cut off the bubble. The problem in America is we just keep pushing the bubble till it explodes. It's like blowing a balloon, blowing it until it fills up and it finally pops because it can't expand any further. Right? Ludwig von Mises won a Nobel Prize for looking at how market economics work. When you have a free market, you don't have the bust to boom cycle. When you have a centralized bank and they constantly artificially keep the interest rates low while inflating the money supplies, you get a boom and eventually a very tragic bust. But that's intentional because it's meant to bolster up the corporations. It's meant to give power to those at the top. China's huge debt accumulation. China's corporate liabilities are the world's largest, measuring 14.2 trillion in 2013. Overall, Chinese debt, including governmental, corporation, household, has risen from 151% of GDP to 250% of today's. This is an extremely high figure for a country at China's level of development. Okay, well, what's ours going on? And we have all kinds of infrastructure falling apart in the U.S. Like, come on, man. They have all the manufacturing, they have the jobs, they have the land, they're building their infrastructure. This bubble ain't gonna pop, guys. Our bubble's about to pop. I'm telling you, can't inflate your money. Like, you can't not inflate the money the way we've been doing. 60-70% of all money ever printed since we've gotten off the Bretton Woods standard in a year. And we're doing it again this year. The Chinese property bubble. China's expansion of its monetary base also fueled inflation. Inflation was officially 6% in 2011, though unofficially estimates went up much higher as the yuan that Chinese citizens hold lost its value every year on year. China's state-owned banks have capped the deposit rate for savers. This effectively subsidized the state-owned enterprise that the state-owned Chinese banks almost exclusively lend to. Except for right now, if you look at the current numbers, I covered this just a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, about Chinese banking. I will link that at the end of this. In years past, the rate of inflation has outpaced the deposit rate. And as a result, the Chinese have poured their money into property, the only asset that has seemed to store value. Yes, because property always maintains value, even if there's a bubble. Yes, your value may fall, but if the rest of the value, land value around it, property value around it rises, even though it may fall, if you made that initial investment cheap enough, you are going to make gains. So they're looking at this, and I'm telling you right now, this is nothing compared to what the U.S. is doing. I've shown you the charts before, right? We're looking at this chart, and for like the U.S., it's like this, and then we're just like, and that's all in this last year. There are no bankruptcies in China. Well, there really aren't a lot in the U.S. either, except for on individual levels. China bulls look at the bubble and surge. They correctly point out that the debt provincial Chinese government property firms and perennial efficiency SEOs have built can be paid off by China's massive store of capital reserves. In other words, China has enough money lying around to bail everything out, which we don't. We just print it. And so he continues. Here's another one from the national interest, but for the sake of time, I will skip it. But you can look up this gentleman making similar predictions. No. This is May 19th, 2015. I'll actually probably come back to this, given that I'm going to cover this probably for the next few weeks, because there's just a lot of articles, a lot of perspectives to look at. And again, though, mine is pretty simple. China's going to be the new world superpower. They are going to have the world currency, and this will be happening by the end of the decade, or by 2050 for certain. But America has not long before we get into a very, very bad spot. And we are in the midst of our own cultural revolution. And I don't mean like we had in the 1960s. I mean like the one that China had in the 1950s and 60s. So from Forbes, November 12th, 2019, China's grand plan to take over the world. Again, I will come back to this. I do want to bring up this. From the BBC News, this was February of 2021, so just came out this month. China promotes education drive to make boys more manly. Look at this. It's pretty manly. I mean, cold weather training is pretty awesome. Throwing some snow on yourself, shirtless out there. A notice from China's education ministry has caused a stir after it suggests young Chinese men have become too feminine. The message has been criticized as sexist by many online users, but some say China's male celebrities are partially to blame. Online users, like the CCP, gives who? Not the WHO, folks. Another kind of who, right? For a while, China's government has signaled concerns that the country's most popular male role models are no longer strong athletic figures like army heroes. Even President Xi Jinping, a well-known football enthusiast, has long been seeking to cultivate better sports stars. Cultural, social engineering, folks. They just do it overtly. We pretend here in the States and in Western Europe that we don't do it at all. Like you have to be blind, willingly blind, to not see how it is done. Like, look at what they're doing with our schools right now and our children and the transgender agenda. The proposal to prevent the feminization of male adolescents called on schools to fully reform their offerings on physical education and strengthen their recruitment of teachers. We sort of had this in the 1960s under JFK, actually. But what we're seeing is they're building up their masculinity, their natural inclined leadership, that is, because between the sexes, men are generally the leaders. This is just our personalities, guys. It's nature. You call it nature, nurture, whatever. It's nature, right? If you believe in evolution, I believe in God. But either way, either point you start with, you get to the same place. Men and women are different. They have different roles for reasons, and those reasons make us a complementary being and not in opposition. But see, we're still in the phases of demoralization and divide and conquer here in the West. They went through all this in China a long time ago under Mao, and now they're like, yep, let's get back to what is real, and that is we need to have strong, hard men leading society so that we're not taken over by stupid Western liberal democracy, which they won't be. The text advises recruiting retired athletes and people from sporting backgrounds and vigorously developing particular sports like football with a view to cultivate student masculinity. And so this goes on, but basically there's a whole thing going on here. It says, what are men afraid of? The overwhelming majority of Chinese reaction to the notice has been negative. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese have taken to social media to voice their anger, and many branding the government's message sexist. Is feminization now a derogatory term? Well, I mean, we kind of found this too in Poland, right? and in the Czech Republic. They're not putting up with this stuff. In fact, Eastern Europe's still pretty based. They have the Orthodox Church as well, though. Is feminization now a derogatory term? One Weibo user asked, receiving over 200,000 likes. Ooh, must have been important, or virtuous. Another said, boys are also humans, being emotional, timid, or gentle. These are human characteristics. Of course. But like we're not talking about like men being vulnerable. We're talking about men being weak. Being vulnerable and honest, guys, is perfectly fine. I was just at the Full Spectrum Warrior Protectors Summit, which is geared towards civilians, but there was training there. It is very God-focused and masculine-focused and leadership-focused. There were men there crying. There were men there that gave their life to the Lord. There were men there that were baptized. I teared up during that because, man, it's amazing. It's an amazing thing to watch. There's nothing wrong with being emotional or vulnerable in appropriate times. What men must burden themselves with, though, is carrying out the tasks that need to be done. Our amygdalas are different than women's. Our amygdalas are meant to repress emotions for reasons. Very good reasons. Women are meant to be emotional because they have to take care of children. Therefore, they have to be more on edge for, scary things like bears coming to eat them. The lions are chasing you down on the savannah. What are you going to do? You got to protect your child. Men, we can't run away because we have to stand and protect for our progeny to survive. Women and children first, right? That's misogyny, and it's the right way. And someone cut that, take that out of context. My point is today that's considered misogyny, and it's not misogynistic at all. It's paternal. It's paternal and taking care of the generations to come. The most important job you will ever have in your life is preparing people for the future, our children, our young men, our young women. We don't do that anymore. We are a short-sighted, evil, wicked people. And I'm not saying that the Chinese government isn't evil either, but they understand that they don't want what's happening in the West to happen to them because they wish to maintain power. Anyways, this article continues. Look it up. China promotes education drive to make boys more manly. I have gone over the hour mark, but that happens. Had a lot to cover. Have a lot more to cover. I will be doing these, guys. These, I call them my regular segments. Whatever. They're the least regular that I do anymore. But I will be doing these. These will be out every Tuesday and Friday. They should premiere at 6 p.m. Eastern. Guys, go over to my locals. Follow there. Create a little account. It's free. Rumble. Go follow over there because one day YouTube will not like me anymore. They already don't like me. I gain a sub and I lose a sub a lot. Hasn't happened as much lately. I either made someone mad or they just stripped them from me. And I am more inclined to think that YouTube just stripped it from me because who goes into their subs and like, I'm no longer sub to this person. I mean, maybe, but my views haven't changed in the last 6 months. Well, maybe I'm going on 7-8 months doing this. However long it's been. These are views that I've developed my entire life. I'm 40 years old. It's something that I've been studying and looking at for a long time. I'm not just going to change on a dime. I'm not a young kid. In any case, go over to PeerTube. You can subscribe there. That is kind of a federated, Fediverse type streaming site. You can go down lots of rabbit holes there, by the way. Lots of stuff. Basically independent servers. I am there. It's a backup, but it's available. I'm uploading now to BitChute once again when BitChute allows me to upload. Sorry if you're watching this on BitChute, but guys, get your stuff together because I don't even have my auto upload thing doesn't even work from YouTube. So whatever. Once I get past 300 subs, unless Library changes it again, I will be on Library because they will auto upload my entire catalog. But for now, whatever. Not even messing with it. Also, live show. The Ends Justify the Memes every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. That is Eastern Standard Time. That in the U.S., right? I don't know what other Eastern times there might be, but just in case there are. Eastern Standard Time, 7 p.m. every Wednesday night. The Ends Justify the Memes. We have this coming Wednesday a friend I made of a 4-time Muay Thai champion at the Full Spectrum Warriors Protectors Summit, and that is Kit Cope. And Kit is a very interesting gentleman with a good brain, a lot to say, and a lot of experience in the world. So please tune into that. And of course, like, share, and subscribe. Guys, make sure you are subscribed. Please share. That helps me grow, like, all that good stuff. You know? Do the thing, man. You know, the thing. All right, guys. That's all I have for you today. This has been All Minus One, and I wish you all well.